The metal spoon caught the light as Hunter offizier Karl Hoffmann brought it to his lips, allowing the cool liquid to flow across his tongue. Fresh milk, real milk, not the chalky powder that had sustained him through 2 grueling years in Africa. The flavor was nothing like the substitute they'd relied on since 1941. The sweet, creamy sensation contradicted everything the propaganda machine had drilled into him about American weakness and resource scarcity. That night, hidden beneath his mattress, where prying eyes couldn't find it, he would record his thoughts in a journal small enough to conceal. Words that would bring severe consequences if discovered by Nazi officers patrolling the barracks. The Americans feed their prisoners better than Germany feeds its own soldiers. June 4, 1943, Mexia, Texas. Standing in the mess hall 4 miles west of town, he watched American guards through the windows, casually biting into sandwiches heaped with thick slices of meat. Back in Africa, his unit had existed on 300 grams of canned meat and 125 grams of hard bread daily. Their iron ration supplemented only when fortune smiled and they could scavenge captured British supplies. Yet here, in this nation that Nazi propaganda had repeatedly condemned as weakened by Jewish influence and democratic decay, food seemed to materialize without end. The morning they arrived, nearly 1,850 veterans of Field Marshal Erwin Rommel's storied Africa Corps filed into the dining facility. Not the cramped field kitchens with their 2 horse-drawn soup wagons dispensing thin broths, not the sand-gritty rations they'd endured in North Africa, but a full-scale dining operation with electric refrigerators, steam tables, and industrial dishwashers humming with mechanical precision. Each 5 barrack section had its own mess hall staffed with cooks, waiters, silverware, and meals that by every account were genuinely good. The entire town of Mexia had gathered to witness their arrival, lining the streets as tanned, muscular enemy soldiers marched past in formation down Railroad Street. None of them understood what would happen next. This breakfast would initiate the most profound psychological transformation in modern prisoner of war history. The destruction of Nazi racial ideology would happen not through propaganda or speeches, but through something far more powerful: the simple act of eating. The productivity of American agriculture wasn't displayed on leaflets or posters, but served directly on metal trays: eggs, bacon, white bread, butter, jam, and real coffee. Their entire worldview would dissolve not just from military defeat, but through repeated daily encounters with unimaginable abundance. The events leading to this moment had begun 3 months earlier. May 13, 1943, Tunisia. General Jürgen von Arnim, who'd assumed command after Rommel was recalled to Germany, surrendered along with approximately 275,000 German and Italian soldiers. The Africa Corps, that legendary force which had driven the British nearly to Cairo's gates, which had earned even Montgomery's reluctant respect, suddenly became prisoners. Among them was Obergefreiter Franz Müller, who wore the Iron Cross second class with the pride of a man who'd survived Poland, France, and 2 punishing years in North Africa's unforgiving landscape. His account, discovered decades later in government archives, would give historians the most vivid picture of how German soldiers experienced the shock of American food. We'd been living on 750 grams of bread, 150 grams of fat, and 120 grams of sausage or tinned fish when supplies actually reached us, he recorded. Far more often we survived on dates, whatever we could take from the enemy, or nothing at all. The transformation began in the temporary camps surrounding Tunis. While Müller and 30,000 fellow prisoners waited in makeshift enclosures for transport ships, American military organization was already beginning to shatter what they'd been taught about their enemy. The U.S. Army processed thousands of captives each day with a systematic efficiency that surpassed anything the Nazi regime had achieved, even at the height of its power. But it was the food that delivered the first genuine shock. Feldwebel Hans Klein, captured with the 15th Panzer Division, would later write to his wife from Camp McCain in Mississippi. During those days at Tunis, while we waited for ships, the Americans distributed white bread with our meals. White bread. The novelty alone seemed almost sinister. In Africa, they'd been rationed neckerbrot, a hard, dense whole wheat cracker, when they were fortunate enough to receive it at all. The American guards consumed more bread at each meal than Klein's entire squad had seen in weeks. The Liberty ships carrying them across the Atlantic were themselves engineering marvels of American production. Built at a rate of 3 per day during peak manufacturing, these vessels were returning from resupply missions to Europe. Rather than overflow the ships or dispatch empty hulls home, the military transported prisoners, as many as 30,000 monthly arriving this way. Instead of the cattle cars they dreaded, they found themselves in ship compartments that had been properly converted for human passage, complete with ventilation, light, and functional sanitation. The 14-day Atlantic crossing in July proved to be the second phase of their food revelation. Gefreiter Wilhelm Becker of the 21st Panzer Division maintained a detailed food journal that later survived in letters to his family after repatriation. Breakfast, oatmeal with sugar and milk, white bread with butter, coffee with cream, he documented on July 15th. This was officers' food in Germany, not what ordinary soldiers received. Yet here even prisoners were served it regularly. The meals aboard ship astounded them. American merchant sailors ate steak, eggs, fresh vegetables, ice cream. In Germany, ice cream had been a privilege reserved for top party officials and their families. The galley refuse alone contained more calories than some German military units received in their daily allocations. Lieutenant Heinrich Weber, scion of a Prussian military dynasty stretching back to Frederick the Great, later reflected in unpublished personal writings. As we approached the American coast, I witnessed sailors throwing overboard barely eaten meals, complete dinners disappearing into the ocean. I remembered my men in Africa, grateful for a handful of dates and murky water, and I began to perceive that we were confronting not merely a military adversary, but an entire civilization operating beyond our understanding. August 2nd, 1943, Norfolk Naval Base, Virginia. The first meal on American soil demolished whatever remained of Nazi claims regarding American hardship. Upon arrival, the comfortable railway cars transporting them inland amazed the prisoners, as did the sheer scale and undamaged vitality of the American landscape, but nothing readied them for the abundance before them. At the processing station, they were presented with fried chicken, mashed potatoes dripping with gravy, green beans, cornbread, apple pie, and coffee sweetened with actual sugar. Unteroffizier Johann Fischer, son of a Munich baker, calculated in his personal notes that this single meal contained more meat than his family had received in an entire month back home. The Americans apologized that the meal was simple due to our unexpected arrival, Fischer noted in disbelief. They apologized for food that German generals would have considered extravagant feasting. That instant revealed the magnitude of our collective deception. The railway journey from Norfolk toward the camps of Texas and Oklahoma proved more corrosive to Nazi ideology than any battlefield defeat. As trains carried them inland through Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Arkansas, prisoners pressed against windows, witnessing an America that violated everything Nazi doctrine claimed was possible. At every station, they observed American workers consuming meat sandwiches, drinking Coca-Cola from bottles, smoking cigarettes without rationing concerns. At a Memphis stop, captives watched as dining cars were loaded with fresh provisions. Beef carcasses, crates overflowing with eggs, sacks of potatoes, boxes of fresh vegetables. The quantity loaded for a single train eclipsed what entire German divisions had consumed monthly in Africa. Stabsfeldwebel Rudolf Richter, a peacetime agricultural inspector before conscription, meticulously recorded what he witnessed. The food transported daily on American railways could nourish all of Germany. I observed freight cars bursting with wheat, refrigerated cars carrying milk and meat, entire trains devoted solely to moving provisions from countryside to cities. No military guards, no security measures. Food flowed like rivers. September 19, 1943, Camp Hearn, Texas. The permanent camps delivered another stage of ideological collapse through abundance. America pursued two specific objectives in treating POWs well. First, to guarantee reasonable treatment for American captives held by Germany. Second, to influence the hearts of German prisoners who would eventually return to rebuild a post-war nation. The dining facilities far exceeded conditions most German soldiers had experienced even before wartime. Electric refrigerators hummed perpetually, automated washers processed thousands of plates. Steam tables maintained perfect temperature for hours. Industrial mixers daily prepared dough for fresh bread. Geneva Convention protections guaranteed POWs food, clothing, and medical treatment equivalent to their captors. At Camp Swift in Texas, Hoffman received kitchen assignment. What awaited him there would disturb him for decades to come. "Today we discarded 300 pounds of food," he recorded on September 23rd. Not spoilage, but surplus from over-preparation. American protocol mandates cooking 10% beyond requirements to guarantee every prisoner receives full servings. The excess gets removed. Kitchen ration scales posted for reference read almost like fiction. 3/4 of a pound of meat daily, 1 pound of potatoes, half a pound of vegetables, 3/4 of a pound of bread, supplemented by sugar, coffee, milk, butter, and eggs. Government carefully managed feeding expenses through arrangements with farmers employing POW labor, who compensated 45 cents hourly per worker, partially offsetting the millions necessary for the prisoner program. Feldwebel Hans Klein, stationed at Camp McCain in Mississippi, documented his experience. "For breakfast, we receive oatmeal or cornflakes with milk and sugar, scrambled eggs, bacon, toast with butter and jam, coffee with cream. At midday, meat, always meat, accompanied by vegetables, potatoes or rice, bread and dessert. Evening meals bring more meat, more vegetables, soup, bread, coffee. Sundays feature chicken or turkey with all conventional trimmings." The prisoners recognized that American military provisions exceeded what German civilians had received even pre-war. German civilian rations had plummeted to 278 calories in 1942 and 1943, then climbed to 1,981 calories in 1943 and 1944. Meanwhile, German POWs in American camps consumed over 3,000 calories daily. At Camp Clinton, Mississippi, housing Germany's highest-ranking captives, including 25 generals, the situation was even more striking. General von Arnim, Rommel's successor, occupied a residence with an assigned automobile and driver. The generals employed personal cooks and requested specialized meals. They dined on steaks, roasted chickens, fresh fish, and vegetables absent from German stores since 1940. Even enlisted men's provisions stunned the captives. Obergefreiter Franz Müller wrote from Camp Shelby describing lunch. "We received fried catfish, caught fresh that morning from Mississippi waters. Accompanying it, coleslaw, hush puppies, fried cornbread, green beans, and peach cobbler. The Negro soldiers serving us consumed identical meals. Germany had taught us that Americans starved their Negro population. Another fabrication erased." October 1943. As autumn progressed, German captives laboring on American farms witnessed scenes that utterly demolished Nazi agricultural theory. From 1943, when prisoners arrived in significant numbers, through 1945, when the war concluded, captives in Texas harvested peaches and citrus, brought in rice crops, felled timber, made hay, threshed grain, gathered pecans. At a dairy operation outside Huntsville, Obergefreiter Ernst Wagner observed in horror as the farmer emptied hundreds of gallons of milk directly onto pasture land because the processing facility couldn't absorb the volume. "He poured without hesitation," Wagner wrote, "milk for which German mothers would have sacrificed anything, wasted irrigating grass. When I expressed concern, the farmer explained surplus production simply collapsed prices if it all reached market." About 12,000 captives worked in Nebraska camps. They labored alongside farms, stacking hay and working sugar beet fields. Gefreiter Paul Schmidt, assigned to corn farming operations, recorded his observations. "The farmers' chickens consume grain without restriction. The farm cats receive fresh milk each day. The dogs get meat scraps that would nourish an entire German family for days." American farmers contracting POW workers regularly invited prisoners to share their own meals. This violated no regulations provided guards remained present. These farmhouse dinners inflicted perhaps the most devastating psychological damage. Farmers typically provided meals for their contracted prisoners, spreads that overwhelmed the captives. Platters of fried chicken, bowls of mashed potatoes swimming in butter, green beans cooked with ham, corn dripping with melted butter, biscuits smothered with gravy, assorted pies, pitchers of cold milk, endless coffee. Christmas 1943, the holiday feast delivered psychological consequences from which many prisoners never recovered. At Camp Hearn, the Christmas dinner menu seemed pulled from fantasy. Roast turkey with stuffing, honey-glazed ham, mashed potatoes with giblet gravy, candied sweet potatoes, green beans, corn, cranberry sauce, fresh-baked rolls with butter, mince pie, pumpkin pie, apple pie with ice cream, coffee, milk, apple cider. Feldwebel Hans Klein wrote from Camp McCain, "We consumed until physically ill, not from tainted food, but from sheer quantity. Our digestive systems, conditioned by years of deprivation, couldn't process such volume. Men wept during the meal, thoughts turning to starving families back home." The contrast with German rations proved stark. Captives held in German camps received 9 pounds of potatoes weekly, supplemented with 5 pounds of bread and 2½ pounds of cabbage, with minimal margarine and acorn-based coffee substitute. By contrast, German POWs in American camps experienced nutrition levels unknown since peacetime. March 1944. Spring's arrival brought even greater variety to camp menus. Fresh vegetables materialized daily: lettuce, tomatoes, cucumbers, radishes, carrots, celery. Fruits previously unimaginable luxuries, oranges, grapefruit, bananas, strawberries in season, became routine. The variety alone staggered men accustomed to unchanging military fare. Camp bakeries produced fresh bread continuously: white, whole wheat, rye, whatever the bakers chose. Those working in bakeries reported consuming more flour in a single day than German bakeries received monthly. Obergefreiter Johann Fischer, the baker's son assigned to Camp Swift's bakery, documented his experience. "We produce 500 loaves daily for our compound exclusively. We fashion pastries, cakes, cookies for special occasions. The sugar allocated daily for our desserts would sustain a German bakery for months." Summer 1944. The Normandy invasion on June 6 meant Germany now fought simultaneously on 3 separate fronts. The food situation within American prisoner camps never truly changed direction. In fact, it only grew better as more captives found themselves assigned to farm labor, where they witnessed American agricultural abundance firsthand. In Nebraska's sugar beet fields, prisoners discovered something staggering. American farmers in a single county harvested more sugar beets than entire German provinces combined could produce. At an Arkansas canning facility, prisoners watched thousands of perfectly good peaches get discarded because of minor surface imperfections. Over at Fort Lewis in Washington state, another contingent of German captives was making similar discoveries. One of them, 18-year-old Gunther Graver, had arrived in August 1944 following his capture in Normandy. Picture him standing before the camp canteen that August or September, trying to decide whether to purchase ice cream or a bottle of Coca-Cola. Years had passed since he'd last bought ice cream in Germany, and he'd never purchased Coca-Cola there at all. So he bought both. Later, he reflected on something that struck him with overwhelming force. He suddenly grasped how incredibly fortunate he'd been captured by American forces rather than the Russians. By September 1944, after spending more than a year as a captive, many German prisoners had gained between 20 and 30 pounds. Physical examinations documented improvements across every health marker. Their teeth became stronger thanks to regular milk consumption, their bones more solid from adequate protein, their complexions clearer from vitamins in fresh vegetables and fruits. Dr. Friedrich Bauer, a German medical officer held at Camp Shelby in Mississippi, carefully recorded this transformation. The prisoners who had arrived showed signs of serious malnutrition, with many suffering from scurvy, pellagra, and other diseases caused by nutritional deficiency. But after 1 year in American hands, they had become healthier than ever before in their lives. The change in their physical condition was absolutely remarkable. The impact went far beyond the physical realm, cutting deep into their psychology. Gefreiter Wilhelm Becker wrote that conversations changed fundamentally. No one spoke anymore about German victory. How could anyone believe in victory over a nation that fed its prisoners so abundantly while simultaneously fighting a war across multiple continents. Such resources demonstrated an advantage that could never be overcome. By December 1944, Germany launched its final major offensive. Yet inside American POW camps, the Christmas dinner that year surpassed even the feast from the previous year. Turkey, ham, roasted beef, accompanied by all the traditional side dishes plus extraordinary extras. Fruitcake shipped from American bakeries, candy canes, genuine chocolate. Not the turnip substitute variety that had become standard in Germany, nuts and fresh fruit. At Camp Clinton in Mississippi, Italian prisoners who had switched sides following Italy's surrender were brought in to help prepare special Christmas meals. German prisoners observed their former allies, now working cooperatively with Americans, preparing food using ingredients that had disappeared from German tables years before. Olive oil, real cheese, white flour. On May 8, 1945, Victory in Europe Day arrived, yet the lesson about food continued. German prisoners learned that American civilians had never endured serious food rationing during the entire conflict. Meat had faced restrictions, sugar and coffee had been limited, but Americans never experienced genuine hunger. The American agricultural heartland had remained completely untouched by warfare. When May 1945 came, the office of the Provost Marshal General reduced available food and discontinued canteen sales. American civilians had protested that prisoners were eating too generously. Even with these reductions, German captives received more food than German civilians would encounter for years after the war ended. The statistics, when finally compiled, revealed a stunning disparity. German prisoners in America consumed an average of 3,200 calories per day. German soldiers in active combat theoretically received 3,600 calories when supplies actually reached them, which happened increasingly rarely. German civilians by 1945 received fewer than 1,400 calories daily. American camps served roughly 3/4 of a pound of meat for each prisoner daily, while the German weekly military ration included merely 120 grams of sausage or canned fish whenever available. This contrast between American abundance and German deprivation became the most powerful argument against Nazi propaganda, not through words but through direct daily experience. By summer 1945, as German prisoners prepared for their journey home, many desperately begged to remain. They had witnessed an agricultural system that reshaped their understanding of human possibility. Hans Wecker, a captive at Fort Robinson in Nebraska, would later remember it vividly. For many of us who had grown up in cold water apartments in Germany, the camp represented a massive improvement. We found running water, central heating, and abundant food everywhere. Our treatment was genuinely excellent. The re-education program achieved its greatest victories, not through lectures, but through meals. Every single day, German prisoners encountered evidence that demolished Nazi teachings about American weakness. Every satisfied appetite challenged their previous beliefs about racial superiority and democratic failure. Dr. Walter Schreiber, a former German officer and agricultural economist, reflected after the war that the food America distributed to German prisoners alone could have sustained Germany's entire Sixth Army at Stalingrad. The agricultural surplus would have fed all of occupied Europe. We never comprehended that we were battling a nation that had resolved humanity's most fundamental challenge: how to feed everyone adequately. Between 1945 and 1946, 371,683 German prisoners were sent back from American camps. They returned to a Germany that was destroyed, split into zones and starving. Yet they carried with them invaluable understanding. Prosperity was achievable, societies could nourish all inhabitants, democratic systems could generate abundance rather than collapse. Numerous former prisoners became influential figures in West Germany's agricultural transformation. Hans Müller, imprisoned at Camp Shelby, brought American farming techniques to his region, raising crop yields by 40% within 5 years. Wilhelm Fischer from Camp McCain helped construct food distribution networks modeled after American systems. Friedrich Bauer promoted the nutritional standards he had observed in American prison camps. After their release, approximately 5,000 Germans immigrated to the United States, with many more willing to come if circumstances permitted. They pursued not merely economic possibilities, but the food security they had discovered while prisoners. By October 1947, at Fort Lewis in Washington, Gunter Graver ranked among the last German captives being repatriated after 3 years in American hands. Decades later, he would return to America as a prosperous businessman. Yet that specific moment at the camp canteen never left him. When he could choose between ice cream and Coca-Cola, luxuries his family and nation could only imagine. He later wrote that they always received fair treatment, adequate food, and 80 cents daily that permitted them to purchase cigarettes, chocolate, ice cream, and Coca-Cola. Things his mother and sister in Germany could only dream about. In 1985, at Austin, Texas, German POWs gathered for their 40th anniversary reunion, with over 500 returning to America, many bringing families to witness where their awakening had started. Former prisoner Karl Hoffman, now 78 and an American citizen since 1955, delivered a speech that captured their collective understanding. "We came to America as warriors of the Third Reich, convinced of our racial superiority, certain that American democracy was weak. We departed as witnesses to something profound. America's strength derived from agricultural productivity, not racial purity. Each meal in the prison camps contradicted our beliefs. The Americans fed us their enemies better than Hitler had fed us, his own soldiers. They had such surplus that discarding food was routine, not cruel mockery, but simple fact. We learned that a nation capable of feeding its enemies without difficulty has achieved ultimate victory. A society with such resources has accomplished what the Third Reich never could, defeating scarcity itself. We returned to Germany, understanding our entire worldview rested on deception. Americans had succeeded through agricultural and industrial superiority. We, who had marched as conquerors, underwent transformation by witnessing abundance beyond anything we could have imagined. To America, from your former enemies, thank you for proving that genuine strength comes from creation, not destruction. You fed us when we would have starved you. That generosity and victory defines true power." The auditorium exploded with sustained applause. Americans and Germans together, former enemies united in acknowledging a transformation that had begun with a simple meal in June 1943. The account of German prisoners and American food reveals how genuine change happens through lived experience rather than argument. The German soldiers who witnessed American agricultural capacity became living proof that democracy works practically. Their transformation started not with political lectures, but with daily meals, not with propaganda, but with experienced truth. Each meal challenged Nazi teachings more effectively than any formal education possibly could. The transformation became so complete that when former prisoner Gunter Graver returned to Fort Lewis in 2017, at age 91, he rode a bicycle across the base with signs declaring, "USA, you are my first and final love as a country and people." It was in August 1944 when I came here initially as a prisoner of war. We always received fair treatment, sufficient food, and 80 cents daily that gave us the chance to buy cigarettes, chocolate, ice cream, and Coca-Cola. Things my mother and sister in Germany could only dream of. That's why I've come here 73 years later to express my gratitude. Thank you, America. I will never forget it. Colonel William Percival, Deputy Garrison Commander at Joint Base Lewis McChord, greeted him with memorable words. "You remind us that how we treat someone defines who we are. There are moments even today when we might want to forget that lesson, and you ensure we remember what matters most." German prisoners encountered American agricultural capacity and underwent profound change because of it. They came as enemies, departed as witnesses, and many subsequently became immigrants and friends. Their offspring would come of age in a prosperous democratic Germany allied with the United States, a partnership grounded in understanding born from unexpected kindness. The camps left little physical evidence behind, mostly dismantled after the war, their buildings sold or torn down, their land returned to agricultural use or repurposed. Yet their influence persisted through those who lived through them and in Germany's democratic rebirth that followed. The Marshall Plan, which would feed and reconstruct Europe, extended this lesson about how generosity and victory construct enduring peace. Former prisoners who flourished in post-war Germany frequently credited their American camp experience as transformative. They had encountered prosperity achieved through cooperation rather than conquest, witnessed different peoples working together productively, seen democratic systems generate wealth rather than chaos. These insights, absorbed through daily experience, proved stronger than any theoretical learning. Dr. Arnold Kramer, the preeminent historian of German prisoners in America, concluded that America triumphed in the propaganda struggle not through clever rhetoric, but through sheer reality. Every meal, every electric light, every functioning bathroom constituted an argument against Nazism. The prisoners found themselves converted by prosperity they could physically see, touch, and consume. The numbers represent only half the narrative. Certainly, 371,683 German prisoners were held in America. Indeed, they performed 14 million man-days of agricultural labor. Fewer than 1% tried to escape. Yet the actual story concerns human transformation accomplished through something straightforward: eating well while receiving dignified treatment. As contemporary historians review post-war German democracy's achievements, they often reference the Marshall Plan, denazification efforts, or the Soviet threat. But they sometimes neglect those 370,000 German soldiers who journeyed home having experienced American democracy as day-to-day sustenance. Fair conduct despite being enemies, abundance shared rather than withheld. These individuals became democracy's representatives, each influencing family, friends, and neighbors with their experience. They inhabited the supposed enemy's system and discovered its superiority in every measurable respect. This undeniable experience undermined Nazi ideology more powerfully than any propaganda effort could achieve. When the final German prisoner left American shores in 1946, they left behind an extraordinary legacy. The lowest escape percentage among any major prisoner population in history, the highest rate of voluntary cooperation with camp officials, and the most remarkable transformation of enemy soldiers into future partners. All accomplished not through brutal treatment or relentless propaganda, but through straightforward humanity and plentiful food. The resources America invested in feeding its prisoners through agricultural abundance and logistical commitment produced immeasurable returns. Hundreds of thousands of Germans who had experienced democracy directly, who grasped that American strength emerged from productive capability rather than racial doctrine, who recognized Nazi propaganda as complete falsehood. Ultimately, the German prisoners' American experience demonstrated that genuine power stems from the capacity to generate and distribute abundance. The reality that America could feed its enemies superior to how Germany fed its own troops unveiled fundamental truths about competing systems that no propaganda could match. The German prisoners came expecting to discover American weakness and division. Instead, they found agricultural and industrial capabilities of seemingly infinite scope combined with unexpected humanity. They arrived as prisoners yet departed as witnesses to democracy's genuine achievements. Within their transformation lay the foundation for the Atlantic Alliance, the Marshall Plan, and a reconstructed democratic Germany. They had tasted American abundance and carried that memory forever. Their descendants would mature in a thriving democratic Germany allied with the United States, NATO members, citizens of the European Union, all tracing back partly to that instant when hungry soldiers consumed their first American meal and recognized their entire worldview rested on fabrication. Food had shaped the war's outcome as profoundly as any military weapon. Meals had captured hearts as thoroughly as any battlefield victory, and through that triumph emerged the groundwork for enduring peace, constructed not on coercion but on the possibility of mutual prosperity. The German prisoners discovered American prison food surpassed their military rations, and through that revelation came their complete transformation. In that metamorphosis, they envisioned a world where yesterday's enemies might turn into tomorrow's friends, where democracy could prevail not through military force, but through the revolutionary concept of ensuring everyone, even those arriving as destroyers, possessed enough to eat.